With Sesame Place's most exciting family coaster ever, being little has never felt bigger. Coaster like a champion on the new Oscar's Wacky Taxi. A wooden coaster with hills, thrills, and fun for the whole family. Plus, enjoy all the spinning, soaring, splashing favorites at Sesame Place. Go before they grow. For a limited time, save $20 on a season pass. Now just $99. Taxes, fees, and restrictions apply.
Mental Health News Radio, produced by MHNRnetwork.com. Your source for information about our favorite subject, mental health. This show is brought to you by our incredible sponsors like ZenCharts.com, the intelligent EHR for addiction treatment organizations, CompliancyGroup.com, making sure your behavioral health organization is following HIPAA and compliance guidelines. Remember, folks, audits are never fun, but passing them because of working with Compliancy Group helps you focus on treatment. EverythingEHR.com, devoted to helping organizations find the best electronic healthcare record software in behavioral health. And Service Dogs by Warren Retrievers, SDWR.org, a nonprofit organization that provides service dogs to those with unique abilities and invisible diseases to include autism, diabetes, epilepsy, and PTSD. Until there's a cure, there's a dog. And hey, an SDWR service dog is at work every day, making a difference with one of our own team members. Our incredible sponsors help keep this show on the air and advocating for everyone affected by mental health. Guess who that is? That's everyone in the world. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey everyone, this is Kristen Sunanta Walker, host of Mental Health News Radio, and I am doing our follow-up interviews from National Council for Behavioral Health's amazing conference, NatCon, that was held in Seattle in March of 2017. I was in the media room. They were wonderful, wonderfully gracious to us by giving us a huge media room to do our shows in, and I bumped right into our guest sitting in the meeting room with me, who is Dr. Adi Jaffe. Dr. Jaffe, please tell our listeners, well, first, hello, and please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Hello. So nice to reconnect with you after that amazing NACON conference. I am an addiction expert. I'm a neuroscientist, a behavioral neuroscientist and psychology researcher by training. And I've been doing work in the addiction field for about 15 years. I got involved in it like many other people through some early personal experience. The joke always in psychology is that a lot of times research is actually me search, and that was definitely true for me. I got very confused by my experience with drugs, and I wasn't really clear how I went from where I started in life to where I ended. And so, I really went on a little search for, I would say about, 7 years through all my schooling to really get some answers. And so for the last 10 years, about 7, 8 years after I got my PhD, I've really been working to change the things that I think are lacking in addiction treatment, put some of the focus back on where I think we need to put it on, and, help as many people as I can.
Fantastic. And I know I love a lot of the things I've read that you've written, talk about alternative methods of treatment, not in a, what people are comfortable with is bad way, just in a, there are alternatives if the status quo isn't working for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that actually came from the research. So when I got clean, quote unquote, or I found my sober life back in early 2000s because of an arrest and a lot of drama. And we can get into that later if we want to. But the point is that I was sober in 12 steps for 3 years and it didn't feel right. And at the time, that was the only option presented to me. And so I stuck with it. I mean, I was very dedicated to not going back to jail. And I knew that's something that was incredibly important to me. So I kind of stuck to what I needed to do. Went to grad school, started studying, and it became pretty clear to me pretty quickly that I'm questioning quite a bit about what's going on. And so I myself ended up taking on the Great AA Experiment, which has actually been working on very well for me for 12 years now. But my point was to say, okay, I know that there are problems with the system. And as I was doing research, one of the clearest problems to me was people aren't going to get help. the vast majority of people who struggle with this sort of stuff don't go get help. They don't seek it. They don't ask about it. They never connect with a treatment center or a professional. They don't go to meetings. They don't go any of that stuff. So I kind of made it my mission to some extent to start figuring out why that is. And one of the big studies I did at UCLA when I was a postdoc there after my Ph.D. was to figure out why that is. And once I got those answers is when I started getting involved clinically, because one of the clear answers to me was the shame was a huge problem, especially early on in the process. So especially when people are first realizing they might need help, shame is a massive problem for much more than 50% of the people who need help. And it goes on for months and months. If you follow them for long enough, it slowly goes away as they connect with other people. But it's a big problem right off the bat. Cost is obviously another big one.
Right.
And then the last one was surprising to me. It was really surprising that more than 50% of the people that we interviewed said that they aren't ready to quit. And when I first presented that to people, and by the way, when I was presenting that to people, I was already in my experiments. What I mean by that is I was already recreationally drinking socially. Mm-hmm. And when I showed other people the research study results, they said, well, those people don't really want help. And that really hit me pretty wrong because, you know, the study that we designed was only to look at people who wanted help for addiction treatment. So it kind of seemed odd to me that you would say, well, these people enrolled in a study about looking for addiction treatment, but they don't really want help.
Right.
And so I started looking more deeply at that. And honestly, for the last while, and when I started the treatment center I've been running for the last 5 years up until recently, that was one of our primary focuses is what if we don't tell people that they have to quit forever? What if we don't make that part of the equation and we just ask them what they're looking for? What would the recovery look like then?
Interesting. I interviewed Tom Horvath with Smart Recovery, and
Great.
Of course, I'm sure you're familiar with his work. And
we're good friends.
Oh, good. Well, of course you are, because I like both of you very much. So of course you would be good friends. He's wonderful.
He's a great guy. Tom's a great guy.
He is very, very understanding because, boy, he has been publicly blasted, and so the way that he handles it is like the way of the peaceful warrior.
Yeah, and you can call it diplomacy or whatever, but you know, I'm not silly enough to think that I have the answer, but I definitely know I have an answer for the problem, and I know how many people have benefited from it through all the work that we've done, and so I'm really happy to get the word out about it.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I don't resonate with the avoidance altogether. And mostly I didn't resonate with it from the codependency side with when I go to CODA meetings, which are obviously those are 12-step meetings as well. I did not feel comfortable saying every time I had to raise my hand or go to the bathroom, hi, I'm Kristen and I'm codependent. Now I have a question. I just didn't want to keep putting that label on myself because to me, obviously, words are very powerful things. And I agree. I just don't want to keep putting that out to the God of my understanding, as one of our other guests likes to say, but I just don't like putting that out there. So that's where I had a really hard time with it, you know, in that respect. And I know many other people have had that problem as well.
Absolutely. So you hit on a couple of really big things. So I gave a TEDx talk about 2 years ago now, I think, on the shame related to labels. And it's funny, I get into this discussion quite a bit with people. I'm also very particular about language. And so one of the things that people underappreciate is how powerful our words are and how powerful our expectations of other people are. So I really try to drive it home to people that if you expect addicts to be liars who obfuscate all the time and are resistant and don't want to get help, you're going to deal with people who are liars and who obfuscate and who don't want help. And this is research proven. It's not like I'm not making this up. This is not some juju, new agey stuff.
Right.
There are studies that are scary, right? That show that, I use a few different ones in different talks, but I'll go with a low problem one. There was a study on golf where they took a group of black students and white students and they brought them in to do this golf-based task. And in one condition, they told them that this was a test of innate natural athletic ability. And the black students performed better. And they brought in another group of students and they told them, well, this is a test of intellectual athleticism. So your athletic smarts. And the white students performed equally better as the black students did to natural ability. And this follows a long stream of stereotype threat and all these other experimenter bias sort of studies that show us that if I believe something about you, you are more likely to behave the way that I believe. And that's the reason why medications are supposed to be done using double-blind trials, because if I know that I'm giving you the medication, something in the way that I'm going to treat you is going to impact your benefit from the medication. And people don't think about this, but we have such ridiculously bad stereotypes for addicts. And then we wonder why they lie. We wonder why they resist treatment. We literally, I mean, one of the biggest phrases in addiction treatment is, how do you know an addict is lying? Their lips are moving. That's insane.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be helping these people. And what you were saying in the beginning is, then we make them get up and identify that thing that everybody hates over and over and over. So for me, the power of labels is really important. I'm not a big fan at all of anonymity. I think anonymity is another tool to keep people shamed. And then last but not least is the fact that you can rewrite the meaning of what addict means in your head. You can totally do it, but you have to be active about it. You can't just avoid it.
Yeah, I agree. And listen, I don't want to, and I know you're not doing this either, but I know just from other co-hosts and other guests, 12-step programs have been the thing that they absolutely in their soul know has saved their lives. And that is so awesome. That's a wonderful, beautiful thing. It doesn't have to be the only thing. It's like psychiatric medication, and one Zoloft doesn't work for everybody.
Absolutely. Here's the caveat though, and this is the thing that bothers me sometimes, because I think you're 100% right. I think it's a tool in the toolbox. And some people don't like that tool, and that's fine. But the thing that is odd is in most other areas of medicine, not all, but in most other areas of help in general, forget medicine, there are multiple tools, right? Firemen go out with hoses and axes and a whole host of, fire retardants and all this stuff.
Right.
They go out with a tool belt. We've come to this weird place where just because I don't think AA is the only thing that is helpful, or if I think that some people can learn to moderate their use, all of a sudden it becomes a fight. And that's the thing that I have a hard time understanding. Like, why? I know 100% for sure that we have helped clients, and we have helped some of those clients moderate their use, right? No question in my mind, it has happened.
Yep.
I believe it in the same way that those people who've recovered through 12 steps believe what they see. And my question always is, when are we going to get to a place where we stop trying to fight each other and we start understanding?
Exactly.
You tried 2 or 3 12-step based treatment centers and it didn't work. Go somewhere else. Try cognitive behavioral therapy and medication. I gave a talk, CCAP, one of the California kind of certification
Christina
programs.
Christina Badia is there. Yes, I love them.
Okay, great. Yeah, and they were a great organization. And one of the things that I made a point of is, naltrexone is one of these sort of low problem medication. Can't get addicted to it. Helps a subset of people with alcohol problems have amazing resolution. And at the end, somebody came up to me and said, I totally get what you're saying, but I'm a supporter of completely drug-free 12-step. And I said, that's cool. That's totally fine. That's one way of doing it. But there's an irony and a hypocrisy in it, because he sent me the article then about how, you should never use anything that affects you from the neck up, all those same kind of things. But at the same time, I asked him, okay, so do you not allow caffeine and do you not allow nicotine in your meetings? Are people not allowed to smoke? And when he said, well, no, those are allowed. I said, then you're being hypocritical, because you're selecting what you think is okay for people to use, and that's fine. But let's just be clear about that. You can say, I'm okay with these 2 drugs. I'm just not okay with the others. But don't pretend for a second that you're telling people they can't use anything, because you're not. If you go, every time you're stressed, you go smoke a cigarette, that's a mind-altering drug.
Yes, it is. And I look at that in the same way that I look at chronic pain management. I mean, I have that in my family, and they've been through the whole opioid addiction piece because of chronic injuries, and became addicted to pain medication that they were taking for their chronic pain from horrific injuries. Yeah. And some of them smoke marijuana, and it is the thing that absolutely keeps them happy, healthy, not angry, lashing out at people because of the chronic pain that they're in. And there's no way in HELL, not that I have a problem saying that full out, but that I'm going to tell that person, you shouldn't be doing that. You used to be addicted, and I know that that's so controversial that a lot of people are going to just, hang up and not listen to the show because of that. And you know what? Live with someone who has chronic pain every single moment of their entire life, even when they're sleeping, and they find something that they are not abusing, but it helps them able to have a happy, pain-free life. And they're not hurting others.
Absolutely. They're
not hurting themselves. It's well monitored. I am not going to take that away from someone that I love because of a judgment.
Absolutely. And, it's so interesting what you said is when people work with me, typically one of the main things they say is it's realistic. And I think we've lost track of the fact that even if we had a 100% effective solution, and I know that hardcore 12-stepper would tell me that AA is 100% effective, but it's not. But let's say that it even was. If only 5% of people, 10% of people who are sick, quote unquote, are willing to take the medicine, even if you were able to make it 100% successful, and it's nowhere near 100% successful. It's like 10, 15, 20% successful. Right. But let's say it was 100%. You would still only be able to help 10% of people with the problem because they're not willing to take the medicine. So my question is, why we keep working so hard on trying to make treatment that is more effective, but nobody wants to take the medicine? Why don't we start working on treatment that people are willing to engage in, treatment that people are actually willing to be part of? Even if it's only 20% effective, but 80% of people are willing to take it, we're helping 8 times as many people. It's a really weird thing that we've done now, which is we keep playing with this little piece of the pie that is actually willing to get help. But there are millions of people out there who just want support. They just want somebody to sit down with them and understand the underlying stuff, the reason why they're using, because we all know this, right? I mean, rarely, you talked about some opiate people who get dependent because of pain, and that for sure happens. But with most other drugs, and oftentimes also with opiates, but with most other drugs, the reason people become dependent is because they were using it as a coping strategy.
Right.
And the treatment, therefore, is only very tangentially about the drugs. The treatment is about what is it that was missing? What is it that you were trying to do that made you use that? Yes. And when you tell somebody, imagine if somebody had a broken leg and you tell them, well, in order to work on your broken leg, I need you to throw away your crutch forever. We don't do that to people.
Right.
We just don't. We say, show up with the crutch, we'll do some work, and then you can use the crutch. So I just don't understand how we came to this place, other than the fact that we come from a very puritanical background in this country. I don't understand how we got to a place where we tell people, yeah, sure, I'll help you, but the only way I'm willing to help you is if you completely change your life.
Well, it's like when I used to go, I won't say their actual name because no one wants to be sued, but there's a program years ago, I'm sure it's still around today, that I used to call Land Shark, which was one of those, positivity, very closely aligned with Scientology, which I don't care if they don't like what I have to say, but very cultish. And the first thing that they would do when you come in is, well, you need to cleanse yourself of all psychiatric medication and take these vitamins. You're not allowed to be here. And I looked at them, and I at that time I wasn't taking medication. Now I do take an antidepressant, thank God. And I thought, how utterly irresponsible of you to tell people that they must stop. My God.
Yeah. And I think we do that a lot, and people do cling to it because people like simple explanations. And, I just had this conversation with somebody last week, and they were saying, what everybody loves about the 12 steps is it's easy to understand. There are 12 steps. Just do the 12 steps and you'll be healed. I get that people like simple explanations, but Occam's razor notwithstanding, it's not always true that the simplest explanation is the best one. And and if you look for a simple explanation around substance use problems in general, I was leading a group last night. People feel shame. Yes. How about that? To me, that's an underlying basic explanation. But some people get more ashamed through the 12 steps, and we need to respect that. We need to allow those people other opportunities. So many people say, oh, come on, just get through it and go to a meeting. Well, okay, that's great. That's a good answer for you. But what if it's not for somebody else? We still need to find a way to help them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, the friends that I have that are avid 12-steppers and their lives are magnificent right now. And obviously part of the reason why their lives are magnificent is because they are avid 12-steppers. Oh my gosh, more power to that.
And look, anything you find that is helpful for you is great. But, you know, we really need to kind of step back a little bit and see why we believe we have to be so dependent on a single tool.
Exactly. In many areas of our lives, not just addiction.
Yeah.
That's a whole myriad of shows that we could go on that theme.
Yeah. No, that's very true.
So let's talk about your own recovery, because obviously most people that get into behavioral health of any kind, most of them have a personal history or a personal relationship to why this becomes a passion. So for our listeners' edification, do you mind sharing a bit about why this is so passionate for you?
Not at all. I have no problem sharing it. It's available online in many, many places as well. But
right.
I'll tell you. So my story kind of goes like this. I had a pretty normal childhood, grew up, family together, moved when I was in high school. When my family was in high school, we moved to Chicago at the time. And what had happened was I got in with the crowd of people who introduced me to alcohol at some point. I drank and all of a sudden was less anxious around girls, and I really liked that. And so we started drinking on a pretty regular basis, like on the weekend. And then weed got introduced a couple of years after that. But all in all, pretty normal, other than the fact that, like with everything else, I was pretty impulsive and hard to manage. And so I took things a little too far. And so I started smoking weed on a regular basis, and I was drinking on a regular basis. And then I had a breakup in college. First semester of college, girlfriend and I were trying to stay together, even though we went to different schools. Pretty typical story, I think. And we didn't stay together. We broke up, and I went into a clinical depression for, I think it was 4 months or almost 6 months. It was bad. And during that time, I experimented with a lot more drugs. I was looking for something to numb.
Right.
So cocaine and acid and mushrooms and ecstasy and all these things during that time. And then I ended up moving myself. This was in upstate New York. I ended up moving myself to California, and things got quiet for a little bit because I didn't know people. But pretty quickly, as I started getting to know people, the drinking took a little sidestep, and I wasn't really that into that part of it anymore. But I was getting into harder drugs. So the cocaine was making an ongoing entrance. Ecstasy became a pretty standard staple on my weekend, and so did acid and mushrooms and hallucinogens. And I was not really part of my life other than my drug life. Everybody I was hanging out with was using a lot. And then, like a good forward-thinking entrepreneurial young man, I decided that I was going to start selling the drugs because they were costing me a lot of money, and I didn't have a lot of money.
Right.
So I said, well, if I sell them, I'll be able to use more. And that went really well. It went too well. And so what ended up happening was I became a drug dealer. And during that time, somebody introduced me to meth. And that was the one. I mean, I liked ecstasy a lot, the thing that everybody calls Molly now. I like hallucinogens a lot, but meth caught me. I started using it for studying. And then eventually, pretty quickly, within a couple of months, I was using it every day. I was selling a lot of it. I was selling a lot of ecstasy. And so my whole life became literally engulfed in drugs. Everybody I knew used or sold drugs, literally up in days on end, 3, 4, 5 days at a time, crash for half a day, get up. And I lived that way for 2.5, 3 years.
Wow.
So it became, I always half joke that it gave me insight into a side of the world that I didn't even know existed. I ended up being robbed at gunpoint. I ended up being burglared a few times. I got my own guns to protect myself.
Right.
When it got scary enough, I ended up with closed circuit TV. I had a recording studio. I was pretending that I was a musician. I was DJing and making music, but my life was really drug dealing. Closed circuit TV all around. I became like my own weird little white skinny boy version of Scarface or something.
Right. Right.
And that was the life. And I lived that for a couple of years and got arrested a couple of times in the middle of that, but for very short periods of time. So I didn't really think much of it. It was just part of the deal. But then I got into a motorcycle accident one day, living right around where I am right now, actually sitting talking about this. And when I went down, they got my motorcycle jacket, and in my motorcycle jacket was a half a pound of coke. And that's when things kind of started falling apart. I couldn't walk. Motorcycle accident had me not walking for a year, and
wow,
everything kind of fell apart until a few months after that motorcycle accident, a SWAT team came to my house and arrested me. And they found a lot more drugs than a half a pound of coke. And I was facing 18 years in prison, and I was heavily addicted by that point to meth. Obviously, I'd been using it daily for about 3 years.
Right.
When I had my broken leg in the hospital, I had my assistant bring me meth to the hospital so I could smoke in my hospital bed. It was It was bad. And my lawyer said, you got to go to rehab. He was very smart about it. He didn't even make it about my own needs. He said, you have this court case. And I was really smart because I probably wouldn't have gone for myself, but to save myself from prison, I would.
Right.
And so I went. I had a pretty hard time with it. I got kicked out of my first rehab for using, got into another one and got clean there. Was clean for 8 months before my court case ended, and then I had to go serve a year in jail. And when I got out of that, still sober, I'd been sober for about almost 2 years at that point. It was time to start figuring out how to get my life together. And I tried to get a job. I tried to go to the mall and apply for jobs in restaurants and all this kind of stuff. But I was a 9-time convicted felon at that point. I literally couldn't land any work anywhere. And so I ended up looking at school applications. And at the time, I think now they actually do, which is scary. But at the time, they didn't ask, have you been convicted of a felony? And so I ended up going back to school and it was a very bizarre transformation, leaving jail, being a drug dealer, and then all of a sudden ending up in school. It took a few months to a year to kind of adjust. But I went to get my master's in psychology, and then I got back into UCLA and went to get my Ph.D. And I had a very singular mission, like I said at the beginning, and that was, what happened? How did I get from being an upper middle class kid who had everything going pretty well for them, did well in school without a lot of work, all that stuff? How did I end up from that to somebody who couldn't quit meth for years, even though I tried for about a whole year myself, and who ended up facing 18 years in prison because he was carrying guns? Like, what happened? And once I felt pretty comfortable about that, halfway in the middle, by the way, is when I said, I don't think I'm going to go back to the way things used to be. And I took a breather and talked to a lot of the people around me, and I started recreationally drinking again. This is in 2005. So when I would tell people, they would get very freaked out. I mean, nobody was talking about moderation in 2005. Nobody was allowed to mention those words. All people would say to me was, we'll save you a seat. And and so that took me on this whole little mission of what is recovery? How do people get better? All that stuff.
It's interesting to me too. And I'd say this for our listeners, anyone that has this idea in their head of what a, drug addict or a drug dealer looks like. When I met you, you were sitting in the media room at NatCon in a suit. You're setting up, a much more elaborate setup than I have for your own Facebook Live thing. You're a doctor. I don't put people on pedestals, or at least I try not to anyway. But I thought, okay, well, yeah, obviously he's an academic, and you are. But hearing your story, it doesn't shock me because I've talked to so many people. But I know for listeners, it's like, listen, your ideas about what a drug addict, quote unquote, or a drug dealer, quote unquote, look like are not what you think they look like. I mean, they can be.
I go as far as telling people, you're just wrong. What you think an addict is like, what you think an alcoholic is like, what you think a drug dealer is like, and why they do it is just wrong. It's just wrong. And the reason is, even if you do think that it's me, it's not only me. There are millions of examples. They're all unique. There are patterns. It's funny. I'm a statistician. When I got my PhD, statistics and neuroscience was my major in psychology. So I also understand our need to find patterns in things. But the problem that then ends up happening is we think the pattern fits everybody. And in reality, a statistician understands that it's actually pretty different than that.
Yes.
The patterns rarely perfectly fit anyone, but they're a good general descriptor of what's going on. So in my olden days, I was a good stereotype of what a drug dealer and addict was. I was self-centered, a 120-pound little weakling who kind of just, was going after the sex, drugs, and money, just like any good other dealer. There were some elements to me that, were not maybe like you expect, and some of the ruthlessness and some of that kind of stuff. But the point is, that was a moment in time. And because I think I didn't have some of the expectations from my parents, let's say, and they didn't really know what to expect of me, but they weren't expecting the worst. I got to grow into something better. Right. And if we start limiting people by believing that they have to fit something, that's why. So when I give a lot of talks, I start out dressing the way that I was dressed kind of when I met you. And I find a way to tell the story, and it's different every single time, but I find a way to tell the story where people have no idea that I'm talking about myself being a drug addict or a dealer ever. And I give them some time to develop an idea about that person I'm talking about. My ex-client, I just gave a talk a little bit ago where I pretended I was an ex-client of myself. And so everybody gets this little picture of who it is. And then I show them a picture of me back in those days and they go, oh, wow, I had no idea you were talking about yourself. And I do that on purpose because part of my goal, when I realized the shame that people feel around this stuff, I said, well, if we can help people reduce the shame, we'll end up doing better. We'll end up winning the fight more frequently. Why? Because they'll have the wherewithal, they'll have the capacity to want to break beyond the expectations others have of them. But if we don't do that, if we don't get people ready to say, okay, well, maybe you're in this place right now, but you can grow to a much bigger and better thing in the future, then we leave them feeling hopeless. We leave them feeling like this crutch, this thing that they're hanging on to that we want to take away from them is the only positive element they've got going for them. And then who would want to quit?
Yeah, absolutely. It just fascinates me. I love that you do that and you're an eloquent speaker, so you could get away with telling a story like that and have it be in mixed crowds too. Like Nat Khan, for example, tends to be more buttoned up, but I could just as easily see you going out to, a very different kind of a venue that's not buttoned up and doing the same delivery and still getting the same wow factor from both crowds.
It's funny to go to a place where I went down to Orange County. They had a conference on reentry. So people who've been in prison or in jail and are on probation now and trying to kind of figure out their life. Again, right? I'm like this buttoned up guy. I came up after another guy who was a great motivational speaker, but fit the mold more. His story of drug use, everybody went, yeah, I get it. I was there, etc. And I get introduced as Dr. Jaffe and I start talking and about changes I've seen in people. And then I reveal on purpose, I then reveal that I'm the guy talking about it because I want to knock myself off the pedestal a little bit. This isn't unattainable. I'm not doing this as a unique person who somehow managed to reach this. It's the opposite.
Right.
It's anybody can get anything they want, no matter what the past was for you. You just have to believe that you can. And then, yes, sometimes you have to prove it to people. I still, to this day, it's 17 years after my arrest, 15 years after I finished serving my jail time, then that would make it 11 years since I finished my probation and got my record expunged. And yet, I apply to things and get rejected because my background. The American Psychological Association wouldn't take me on as a member. Why? Because I have a criminal background. When we had alternatives and we wanted me to be a speaker, they said, well, he has a criminal background. We don't know if people should be able to get continuing education to hear him speak. This stuff is still here and it doesn't go away. The difference is I have this platform. I get to talk to you and I get to write for Psychology Today and I get to call the industry out about how ridiculous that is, right? We pretend like we want to help people and we believe that we want to help people, but in the process of helping them, we push them down and we tell them, well, yeah, we want to help you, but not like that. We don't want you to become that successful. We don't think you can do all of that. You have all these character defects. They're not character defects. There are idiosyncrasies to all of this. I am far from a perfect person. I'm so far from a perfect person, it's not even funny. But I got to achieve what I got to achieve. And I'm going to keep living my life and I'm going to keep achieving as long as I believe that and the people around me believe that that's possible. And I want to make that possible for everybody. I don't care if you're shooting up heroin right now or smoking crack as you're listening to this and saying to yourself, well, that's great for him, but not for me. Anybody can get there. We just have to make the decision ourselves that we're going to stop believing that being an addict means we're hopeless.
Yeah. And some of the halls that one can go to, seeking help can be the very halls that keep you from getting past that shame, that keep you at a level of sobriety. Absolutely. For sure. They can absolutely do that, but they don't actually help you grow past the shame piece.
And we get to work on that, right? So we get to have that kind of level of understanding. We get to decide, okay, you know what? I understand that there are all these expectations, but I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to get to understanding what is truly possible for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, okay. You have to come on again. I hope that you will.
I'd love to. Yeah, absolutely.
This is great conversation. Tell our listeners what you're doing now, because I know that you're doing some new things, and by the time this airs, those new things are probably going to be out. So if you don't mind sharing that.
Sure, absolutely. For the last 5 years, I've been running and treating people at a center called Alternatives in LA. with my partner, Dr. Mark Kern, who's one of the original harm reduction practitioners and one of the only ones in Los Angeles. And we've done some amazing work treating about 200 people here over the last few years. And I've been really, really proud of that work. But because of some unforeseen circumstances, my partner getting pretty sick, we've had to slowly kind of close this place down. And so I'm taking this out on my own. And, my wife and I have started a company called IGNTD. And the idea is to do kind of what we talked about. So it's IGNTD, ignited without some of the vowels in the middle. And it's IGNTD.me is the website. And the idea is to help people find that passion, to help people find what it is that their next step is. So we help couples, we help individual men and women, and then we do these co-ed events and we do workshops. And I also work a lot with one-on-one with clients. So I see a lot of individuals one-on-one to help them find their version of recovery. What does that look like for you? What does life look like for you when you leave this phase behind? And I'm really excited about that. So you can look up Dr. Jaffe. I have a page on Facebook that I'll communicate with people through, and you can always reach out. I still have my website all about addiction, which is kind of how I got started writing in this field. And I write on Psychology Today. And through any of those places, you can very easily find me. I'm very visible. And if you need help or you know somebody who needs help and it's, the traditional sort of stuff hasn't worked, please reach out. That doesn't mean it's the end of the road. I've seen people who've been to 6, 7, 8 treatment centers find their way if they just start looking at things a little bit differently.
Right. And I will say to anyone that will look you up, this is a very patient man because Valerie Quintanilla, our COO, and I were completely exhausted, excited, just overstimulated in the media room doing interview after interview after interview. And you had to sit there and listen to our chatter in the background and you were so zen the whole time. And we're just like, blah, 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 blah. So this is a very patient man.
Funny. Well, I've had a lot of time to develop that.
Right. Yes, exactly. The benefit.
You guys were great, though. It was really great to share a room with you guys there and see all the people you brought through. Recovery is an amazing thing. When you start seeing people who are making a difference in their own lives, it's magical.
It is. That's what's so wonderful about this space. And that's what makes, I think, people like you and people like me and Tom Horvath and many, many other people so protective of wanting this space to become what it really can be and what it really needs to be to help people. And that is why we want this bridge between all the worlds that come together, all the tools in the toolbox. Everybody needs to play well in the sandbox together in order for us to really help people. That's all we're saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. And like I said, open invitation. Like when you open, when you officially open, please consider yourself re-invited anytime to come back on the show.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
And thank you.
It was really great talking to you.
Yeah, you too. And thank you to our listeners for another edition of Mental Health News Radio. Please join us next time on Blog Talk Radio/Mental Health News. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. We love hearing from our listeners. Visit mentalhealthnewsradio.com for a list of all of our shows and mhnrnetwork.com to check out all of our amazing podcasters on our network. If you'd like to be a guest on our show, send an email to our wonderful program director, Melanie, at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. And now a final word from our therapy dog, Miles.
Good boy.
The Starlight Lounge presents An Evening with the Progressive Box.
Oh, what a great audience. Let's dim the lights for this next one. Nope, too much. There it is. Gotta get things just right. Like Progressive's Name Your Price tool. Tell us what you want to pay and we help you find coverage options that fit your budget. And now, the mood is right. Wait, the lights are back on again. Trudy, can you? And now it's completely dark.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.